Morning, folks. I'd like us to get started. We had a little technical difficulties this morning, but that's okay. I think we'll survive. I hope you can all hear us well, and I'm thanking you all for coming to our back to school edition of Prevention Perspectives. Prevention Perspectives webinar can be, we'll be able to have that later on for you to pick up and to evaluate. In the meantime, what we want to certainly say to you is that if you sit through this, we'll send you a certificate within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And that's, I think, all the administrative stuff I have to say because the person who was going to say this unfortunately got detained and can't get online. So my name is Jeff Horwitz. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Safe Project, and I'm thrilled to have this opportunity for you all to see a little bit more of what Safe Project does, as well as to understand where we think that perspectives should be, or prevention should be talked about, especially nowadays as we approach prevention and recovery months back to back. Before I talk and introduce Rana Yablonsky, who is our speaker today, what I'd like to do is just take just a few minutes to talk about Safe Project as a whole. Safe Project, if you have not heard from us or heard of us, Safe Project is a national nonprofit that was created by the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and his wife when they lost their son to an overdose after 14 months of treatment and on his fourth day of college. They created a nonprofit for the focus and the importance of us all breaking down the silos and collaborating with each other. And so as a result, we were created to be collaborative in the nature of the things we do. So if you look at the screen, the little circles on the screen, we were created with the intent that says if you're going to work on public awareness or you're going to work on prevention, you also have to work on treatment and recovery. You have to work on law enforcement and prescription drugs at the same time. So we were intended to be collaborative in the things we do to try to make sure that we don't just work on one individual silo, but we work together as a whole, but also collaborative in trying to break down the silos of nonprofits not working together or for-profits not trying to encourage folks to work together in the goal. And so that's why we were created. And we have 4 separate initiatives that we focus on predominantly. And that's when we talk about initiatives, we talk about who the customer is, who the client is. We have one which is known as Safe Campuses, and Safe Campuses works with colleges and universities. One which is Safe Communities, which works directly with the communities to make substance use information, those that are fighting really hard to help us in the communities and the day-to-day struggles in towns and communities more successful in their battle. And that is our Safe Communities portfolio. We have the Safe Workplaces portfolio, which focuses on businesses and tries to meet a business where they're at to do what they can, and one which is our Safe Veterans portfolio. And that deals really more with not just the veterans, but active duty members, caregivers, their family members, as well as the veterans themselves. That's what we were created for, but at the end of the day, we appreciate that there are some things that work through all areas, even though it might be something that you talk about differently on a college and university campus versus a business. The things that resonate are the importance of recovery as well as the importance of prevention. And that's why we're here today to talk about prevention. And so for our Prevention Perspective Back to School edition, we have today Rana Yablonsky, who is in charge of our prevention portfolio. And Rana is the Senior Director of Prevention at Safe Project. She joined the organization in 2021 after more than 20 years, sorry to age you there, Rana, more than 20 years of experience in youth substance use prevention and community coalition development. Her background includes teaching prevention programs and delivering training for trainer courses and conferences, workshops, sessions reaching thousands of students, parents, educators, and members of the community. Previously, Rana has served as the director in 2 multi-sector drug-free community coalitions, where she recruited, trained, and engaged hundreds of volunteers, driving innovations in prevention that aim to reduce harm, injury, and diseases. Rana's lived experience and professional expertise fueled her passion for advancing the ever-evolving field of prevention. For her, prevention isn't just about perfection, it's about progress and finding progress. And that's what Safe Project is all about, is just moving the register in the right direction. She's championed a broad vision, recognizing that prevention isn't simply a one-time achievement, and it's about growth, it's about compassion, and it's about perseverance. And so without any further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Rana Yablonsky. Thank you very much, Rana, and take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. I'm I'm looking forward to this hour with you. I just want to say welcome as well and know that I really appreciate that you set aside some time to attend this webinar. I know that we have very busy schedules. I know this is a really busy time of the year. And so again, just let me say first and foremost, welcome and thank you for setting aside this time. I'd like to begin by sharing areas of focus that were outlined in the webinar objectives. Many of these objectives you may have seen on the flyer for registration, but nonetheless important to kind of level set and get us started. So on the screen, first thing that we're going to be talking about is recognizing early signs of stress, mental health challenges, or substance use. We'll then jump into talking about exploring the role of schools and families and communities in fostering supportive environments for students. We'll move into identifying protective factors that support students' well-being during this back-to-school season and beyond, and then conclude with strength-based prevention strategies that build connection, resilience, and healthy coping skills. Please, throughout, I want you to be thinking of this as a shared learning space. I really want to guide this conversation, but I definitely want to hear from you. I welcome your feedback. I welcome your insight. There will be some reflection questions. And in all of these scenarios, please feel free to use that chat feature. A disclaimer here, and looking at the list of registrants, we realize that we have individuals from different sectors or parts of communities and actually in different lines of work. So love that you're coming here to hear about prevention and to grow knowledge and to learn about opportunities that you might have to come alongside of us who earmark prevention as our career paths or our career journeys. We definitely need you. As the screen says, prevention starts with all of us. And I believe that at the end of the day, we would all say that we have a common bond, and that bond is in support of students and student well-being. Talking about students, this probably would have been a good reflection question. So I'm giving it away here when I share with you that there's an estimate of about 72.5 million students who are preparing to go back into the classrooms this school year for the 2025-26 year. That's a lot of students. Maybe in your community, you've already started school. I know here in Pennsylvania, where I live, school is scheduled to start next week. And so with this comes a lot, right? We are all juggling a lot, and there's a lot of things on our minds. With it comes excitement, maybe, and anticipation. I'm thinking back to whenever my own children were going to school, or even when I was heading back to school. There is that twinge of excitement and anticipation. But along with that, and with that, there's also possibly signs of stress or anxiety or feeling overloaded or overwhelmed, and in some cases, maybe even fear. And when that comes to mind, it makes me think about, well, what can we do to offer support? How can we come along people or students during this time of transition? And so I really want to, move forward here. I was just checking out the chat. I thought maybe there was something on the screen. Nonetheless, we're on track here. I also want to share with you very early in this presentation a really important key data point that you're probably going to hear me say over and over. So hopefully this is a key takeaway and something that it can empower you. And this is through just years of research in the prevention field, this indication that the most powerful protective factor for students, something in their lives that includes the presence of supportive parents, guardians, caretakers, and caring adults. And that's all of us. The support that we can provide as a leading protective factor, in turn, then can set the foundation for students through day-to-day circumstances, as well as in times of transition or when they are facing challenges. So again, we as adults, through science and research, are indicated as a leading protective factor for young people that are in our lives. In relation to the prevention field, this might be a review for some and new to others. So again, come along with me as I'm being mindful and courteous of the different learning levels of the folks that are here with us today. There are two kinds of factors that come into play that influence the likelihood of a student who may be developing or at risk of developing a behavioral health problem, a substance use disorder, or a mental health condition. The first of these risks is considered a risk factor, and a risk factor defined here by SAMHSA as a factor associated with a higher likelihood of developing a behavioral health problem or other negative outcome. Risk factors can be biological, psychological. It can be present in different domains of the child's life or the student's life that include family, community, or cultural level. Examples of risk factors could be things like poor coping skills, internalizing behaviors, so feeling that stress internally and holding it in, potentially a low commitment to school or peer rejection, or a low commitment to community. The second factor then is protective factors. These are factors that are associated with a lower likelihood of developing a behavioral health challenge or other health outcome. For me, protective factors are seen in a much shorter form as a counter. Some people will say, or a buffer or a shield against risk factors. Throughout this presentation, when we're talking about protective factors, you'll often see this image of a shield that really resonates with me and continually reminds me of the importance of building protective factors to offset risk factors. Examples of protective factors, some of which, again, this high level, we'll get into this more as we move through the presentation, could be what I already mentioned. A leading and supportive protective factor is those parents, those guardians, and caring adults. Another example would be a secure attachments, having one's needs met. Another protective factor would be coping skills or problem solving skills. Another might be feeling attached to school and or community, feeling seen, feeling recognized, and feeling heard. Taking a deeper dive now into these risk and protective factors, there are a couple of key features that I think are really important for you to keep in mind when we talk about risk and protective factors. They're really common words, but very dynamic scenarios. The first is that risk and protective factors exist in multiple contexts. What that means is that every student possesses unique skills, talents, traits that increase their vulnerability to, or that could also shield them from, behavioral health challenges. There are multiple domains of influences in a child or student's life that come into play that include the context of family, communities, and society at a larger level. That's the first one. The second one, the second factor or feature to keep in mind is that they are correlated or cumulative. Correlated means that they're connected or that they're related, that when one factor is present, another is often present as well. They kind of move together in the same way. Risks often appear together. So this might be an example of that would be poor attendance and low grades. On the other end of the spectrum, protective factor that could be an example of protective factors being correlated would be a strong family or supportive family unit, and then also positive peer groups. So again, correlated means that they're connected and that they're related. Cumulative means that they build upon each other over time. So the more that's present, the stronger the overall impact on both ends of the spectrum. So that the more risk factors there tend to be more and they build upon each other. And the more protective factors that are in place, they also tend to build upon each other. The third feature is that they are influential over time. These factors influence one another on either supporting or challenging a student's growth and their developmental years, as well as into adulthood. So potential examples to have you better understand that or kind of grasp that concept would be something like ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, or positive childhood experiences. These experiences impact us in the here and now, but they also can have an impact on our health outcomes across our lifespan. The last key feature is that they are associated with multiple outcomes. So basically what that means is that the work in one domain or one area of influence in a child's life or one context of a child's life can cross over into other domains or other contexts of their lives. So an example here, again, let's going back to that strong, supportive, caring adult, could be associated with multiple outcomes that include overall better mental health, better performance in school or feeling more connected to school and community, having opportunities both at the school and community level. These are, again, overlapping and kind of create this web of support for the student. On the other hand, another example as it relates to risk factors, low neighborhood attachment or low attachment to school can be associated to maybe earlier onset of substance use, school delinquency, engagement in higher risk behaviors, for example. It's okay if this is new and seems a little confusing for visual learners. Here's a visualization. When I talk about domains and these important features around young people, this visualization can come into play and potentially help create some clarity for you. This slide represents the different domains in which a student live, interact, and contribute both the risk and protective factors. Understanding these domains is really key, and our work is a leading protective factor and will help us in building strength-based approaches. The domains from the innermost circle to the outermost circle include the individual themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, individuals impacted biologically and genetically as well as psychologically. Then building out from that are the community at large. So we have social networks that include their peers, their family, and then building on from that, we have the community, the towns, the neighborhoods, and then building on from that is society in general. So again, I think optimally important to indicate here is that our work as a leading protective factor would happen in multiple domains simultaneously. And that then associates to that multiple outcomes that I just mentioned to you as the fourth feature. So then recognizing risk factors or the potential impact of risk factors and strengthening protective factors to offset them in all domains will help us in our work of supporting students and helping students thrive and reach their fullest potentials. All right, now we're going to move into back-to-back reflection questions. So utilizing that chat feature, I can see a couple of a couple of the chats, comments and feedback that's coming in through the chats. I'm going to encourage you to use that as well. So the first question here is around risk factors. When you think about a risk factor, again, these are associated with a higher likelihood of developing behavioral health problems or other negative outcomes. I'd like for you to just list what comes to mind. So this can be from your own personal experience. This can come from the experiences of the students that you're working with. I'm going to give you just a couple moments to go ahead and start populating your answers utilizing that chat feature. Thank you, Alex. I see your response there. Thank you, Charlotte. Bullying, poor teachers, loneliness, ICE for sure. Thank you, Isabella. I appreciate that. Rebecca, I see home and food insecurity. Cynthia, I see peer pressure to fit in. Absolutely. So once you get started, it's not hard to think about them, right? There are absolutely risk factors that are present in all of those domains for students. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. While you're wrapping up, the risk factors, again, I mentioned these are back-to-back questions. So the next question then on the screen are what protective factors, so on the other end of the spectrum, what protective factors are in place for students during the back-to-school season? So as you're finishing up your thoughts in regards to risk, I'm going to ask you to transition just a bit and enter in your thoughts around protective factors. Again, remembering that protective factors are associated with a lower likelihood of developing behavioral health problems or other negative health outcomes. Yes, here they come. I see them. Faith-based centers. Thank you, Gregory. Emily, having hobbies, communication skills, hope in life, belonging to school organizations such as clubs and sports. Thank you, Isabella. Access to health and wellness. Absolutely, Alex. Thank you for bringing light to that. Rebecca, trusted adults in the community. Absolutely. Teachers, counselors, supportive teachers, counselors, and school networks, healthy role models at home, food security. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, so absolutely, you guys are right along the right path, right? So again, when we take the time to just sit and think, those buffers or those shields come to mind. So thank you so much for your feedback. Continue to keep it coming. I'm going to move on and share with you how your answers and the feedback that you provided fit into this slide. These are risk and protective factors in substance use prevention. Mind you, I know that I am breaking every rule as it relates to presenting and slide creation. I know that there's a lot of information on this slide. I was intentional about doing it because I thought that it was really important to show that direct correlation that I just talked about a couple minutes ago, as well as the multiple contexts of risk and protective factors, and those contexts being that individual domain, the family relationship domain, the peer school community, and I kind of crunched some of it together because the slide was already full enough. The important thing that I want to draw light to is that the risk factors on the left and then the protective factors on the right and ways in which we can shield or protect. Often in prevention and prevention research and prevention programming, a lot of our emphasis is, as Jeff mentioned, I've been in the field for 2 decades, and no criticisms to this evolving field, only learning lessons. And much of the work early on was focusing in on risk factors and eliminating the risk factors as opposed to building protective factors. And so as the field continues to evolve and grow, being aware of these first and foremost, and then second part of the presentation is how to build upon them. So I don't have the time to review every single thing that's listed here. Doing the highest level of overview for you. I feel like if we took the time to do that, that would far exceed the hour that we have together today. I do want you to know that you will be receiving this presentation after and being able to access this content for further thoughts and for further use in your work. But nonetheless, some of the things that you mentioned are listed here. In the individual domain, we have internalizing behaviors, having elevated levels, of anxiety, depression, and feeling socially withdrawn. Early initiation of substance use or favorable attitudes towards substance use. In the family and relationship domain, many of these things you all mentioned. We have family management problems, lack of adult supervision, history of current use, and then those disparities that many of you mentioned as it relates to poverty, housing insecurity, and food insecurity. And then moving on, underneath that school community domain, you can see some of the things that you also mentioned here. The poor academic performance, having fewer friends, low commitment to school, feeling rejected not only by their peers, but I know some of you mentioned feeling a disconnect when it relates to the faculty at the school or the supports that are offered there. And then the community level, again, things like poverty and trauma. So when we think about all these risks and we think about all of these different levels, we realize how intently impacted young people can be when they're juggling or taking in all of these different risks from these different domains. The part of the work that's most inspiring to me and empowering to me is how is it that we can build then those shields of protection? What are the steps that we can take to offer support to students in the context of our conversation today in the going back to school season? And there would be that domino effect in building these protective factors, not only in the back to school season, but beyond. So listed here again as those offsets are emotional self-regulation, the ability to adapt to a change. These are all areas where we can provide support. We can provide opportunities for engagement in school, with peers. Somebody mentioned spirituality and faith-based or cultural influences. We can provide ways in which we can support students if we knew that these were particular areas of interest for them and what their passions were. What are the things that are most important to them, and which of these protective factors will most support them come into play? So again, I don't have the time to read all of this to you. I really wish that I did, but nonetheless, I think you get the idea in plugging in your responses with the responses that I have provided here. I think it's also really important for me to mention that these lists are not all encompassing, as well as the fact that these indicators in and of themselves are not sole indicators of a substance use problem or potential problems. That's just a disclaimer in general. What I really want to reiterate is the fact that the more we understand about risk and protective factors and how they interact, the better we can be prepared as a leading protective factor to being able to provide supports to students both in the short and in the long term. So this slide then are the risk and protective factors as it relates to mental health promotion, and very much similar to what we just experienced with substance use. Many of the answers that you provided are listed here. In addition to that, there's overlap. So some of the risk factors that are associated with substance use are the same that would be associated with mental health. So as you take a look at each domain, you're going to see some similar answers and some similar risk factors as well as protective factors. Again, that goes back to the feature that I mentioned, that they are correlated and they are cumulative. They happen in multiple domains or multiple contexts. And so what again, the key takeaway here is that we really want to be more about promoting protective factors and building shields against some of these risk factors. There's one that I really wanted to bring attention to as I take a look at this. I think it's on this one. Yeah, under peer, school, and community, this push to succeed and need to achieve. Often we're thinking of students from adverse who have disparities or living in adverse circumstances. We don't often think about the students that who on the outside are doing what appears to be really well. And so they have an intense push to succeed or a need to achieve that's driving them. And in some cases, I just really want to bring light to the fact that even though sometimes on the outside, when it looks like everything's okay, there could be intense risk factors coming into play. All right, moving on. We'll come back to some of this, but I also, again, remind you that this information will be shared with you and really just laying the foundation for the second part of the presentation when we get to talking about a strength-based approach to building protective factors. I have some quick data points that I want to share with you here because data plays an important role in our work of addressing risk and protective factors. The data can indicate to us who is most at risk. The data can contribute to us or share or bring light to what are the risks. It can also bring to light what are some protective factors that might be available to mitigate risks. The data that I'm showing on this particular slide is from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Their most recent, the 2024 National Survey on Drug Use, which was just released about 2 weeks ago. And so we will be sharing links to this data with you so that you can analyze the data more in depth. It's very robust data and it's presented in multiple different ways for all levels of data analysis. And so I invite you to take a look at the data and have the data be a part of the work that you're doing in prevention. Here, what I want to bring light to is that there are promising declines or have been promising declines in substance use. However, and the fact that 1 in 4 are still indicating or self-reporting illicit drug use indicates that there's progress that still needs to be made in the promotion of health and wellness and disease prevention. I also wanted to share just again some high-level data with you as it relates to mental health, since we're talking about both substance use and mental health here today. This is broken down for people ages 12 to 17, and this is data that relates to generalized anxiety disorder, moderate, mild, and major. The interesting thing about this data, and I'll show you in a minute, the next slide, is that these numbers are about double for this age group, age 12 to 17, as it is for individuals who are 18 years of older. For me, this data is concerning, and it reflects challenges that remain in the field and really emphasizes the important work of continuing to build protective factors to offset risk. Here's the data then as it relates to individuals. Same data sets, just a different age group. SAMHSA broke that down for us so that you can see the differences in different age and the different ages of the populations that we might be working with. Again, here, this data might be a little bit more promising, but I really just want to reiterate that the gravity of the situation remains significant, and that we need to continue to emphasize, or I want to continue to emphasize the importance of addressing risk and protective factors, and hopefully empower you and inspire you to do the same. The last data slide is around those that are receiving treatment. So I share these numbers with you, and again, sharing that some of the data is somewhat alarming. And at the same time, when we look at that, we realize that such small percentage of people are reporting that they're receiving treatment. For me, this data, this is an indicator and a lead reason for elevating the why. Why is it that we do the work? How is it that we can make a difference? It's so important to realize that many people are not getting the treatment and support that they need, and that together we can be leading protective factors and elevate our work in the field of prevention. Moving on now to the second portion then of the presentation, where we're going to be talking about the development of protective factors through a strength-based approach. So far, then, we understand what risk and protective factors are. We understand the domains of influence. We understand supportive data indicators, and now really just broadening our understanding on how is it that we can develop protective factors utilizing these strength-based tactics or approaches. This is somewhat of putting a new lens on prevention, or a changed perspective. It shifts away from what is solely wrong or lacking and seeks to utilize the personal attributes of the students, or what resources and skills do the student possess. It recognizes that students are unique, and what works for some students might not work for others. It recognizes that students are complex, yet in complex situations, they have strengths in various aspects of their lives, or various domains of their lives. A strength-based approach is more inviting. It meets the students where they are right now, meeting them in the here and the now. It supports what they value. It supports what's important to them. It fosters their resilience, acknowledging the fact that we are not negating that there are challenges, but yet we also realize that in the face of challenge, we are resilient as humans, and that we can provide these protective factors through our work in prevention, as well as in the lives of individuals. We don't necessarily think of it as work of prevention. It becomes second nature in our relationships with young people and all realms of our lives. I think it's important for you to know that I don't view this, or no one in the field would recognize this as an absolution. Taking a strength-based approach is more about showing up, being present, being mindful, and asking how it is that I can help. I'd be remiss if I didn't include this slide. This slide is identifying for you the different types of prevention. We already talked about the different domains that exist within a student's realm of influence. I think it's important to keep in mind, with the different pockets or populations of students that we're working with, the different levels of prevention. So here we indicate those three levels as primary, secondary, and tertiary. And the takeaway from this slide is that we can build protective factors across all types of prevention, no matter the level. This slide then is accumulation. So a couple of minutes ago, I showed you a whole bunch of information on a slide and reviewed different protective factors for two different scenarios. What I thought would be helpful is if I pulled from that some of the key protective factors as it relates to this back to school season. And so some of the things that you shared in the chat, some of the things that were listed there, these being, again, protective factors that are really important for the back to school season and beyond in other facets of lives or other domains of the students' lives. I'm not going to read them all to you. I let you have the opportunity to take a look at that as I just catch my breath. All right, so having a thorough understanding of the fact of protective factors and our key role is leading protective factors, I want to shift into talking a little bit about a strength-based approach. I don't want to assume that you all would have a comprehensive understanding of that. So just a real high-level introduction here. We have pictured Donald Clifton. He was a psychologist, an educator. He's a researcher, an entrepreneur, and the developer of the Clifton Strengths Assessment. This is a tool that is used to identify individuals' natural talents and what are their personal potential strengths. This is a web-based assessment then that really helps individuals discover what are their dominant talents. And once I know what my dominant talents are, the tool also gives feedback on how to leverage them in different aspects of your life. This tool really just hones in on what people naturally do their best rather than what are their shortcomings. And I think it's really cool to add here that I experienced this tool, the Clifton Strength Assessment, as an employee here at Safe Project, along with my team members. And I can assure you that it definitely fosters self-awareness. It's a real eye-opening experience. And it encouraged us to share what our strengths are. And then even more importantly then is what strengths do we bring to the table and how can these strengths complement our collective work and our collective mission. So it was a really neat experience and thought it was important to recognize it here in this idea that the philosophy that Dr. Clifton had around strength-based approaches was later adopted in the social work realm as well as in counseling. And this took place in the early 2000s. There are some examples of other strength-based approaches in other fields that you might be familiar with include motivational interviewing, mental health first aid, solution-focused therapy, and there are more. Those are just a couple that are coming to the top of my mind. In the prevention field, then, I think it's important to note that there are examples here as well, that the prevention field, as I mentioned earlier, is evolving and growing. And so as late as, or as early, however you're looking at it, as the 1980s, there was the Strengthening Families program that has grown and new renditions of this curriculum and program have been released. But the idea here is it brings parents and families together for reoccurring classes to build upon strengths that the family might have. There's also the social development strategy, which was developed after about 30 years of research in the prevention field. The social development strategy is very much a part of the Communities That Care Coalition framework that many of you, again, might be familiar with if you're doing coalition and community work. The Communities That Care model, utilizing the social development strategy, then was really intentional about focusing in on protective factors in their everyday work with youth volunteers, building upon the strengths and elevating the work of the coalition and the mission that the coalition had in place. More recently, a book that I wanted to share with you is a book that is written by Dr. Victoria Banyard and Dr. Sherry Handley. This book was released in 2022. The title of the book is Strength-Based Prevention Strategies for Reducing Violence and Other Public Health Problems. And in this book, it's really unique because the authors talk over and over again about strength-based approaches in prevention, and they're drawing from years of their own research and talk about and give really real-life examples of how amplifying strengths can insulate people from risks. All right, so knowing all of this, I really want to get into a little bit more about the why before I give you an example and walk you through some of the recommended steps in taking this process of a strength-based approach. Some firsthand testimonies from the author first and foremost, and then from my personal life. And so Dr. Banyard, while working on her dissertation, these are some of her words and some of the content that I'm pulling from the book. She was earning her dissertation in graduate studies and certification in women's studies. And she had the chance, as she says, to work with youth and at-risk youth in preschools, on school campuses, at sexual assault centers, in schools, agencies, and with children that were facing adversities. This is a quote from her. She said, in doing so, I have gone into many classrooms expecting to give resources to children that were weighed down by severe adversity. What I came away with and was affected by was their equally clear abilities to learn, grow, and express joy and connection. And another example, again, that's profound for me. I think that that's really interesting that she went in with the notion that I'm going to give them something, but instead came away infected by what they in turn gave her. She then goes on to talk about another example that when she was working with homeless mothers in a shelter and some incarcerated moms, and she shared that she was deep into her research, really contemplating if she should be taking different approaches to her research. She got the advice of a mentor and another community activist who herself was homeless, and decided that for the last set or group of interviews and research that she was going to do, that she was going to take a completely different approach and start with this question. She was going to ask the clients, what is your strength? What is a skill that you have? What is something that you like about yourself? And she says that the first time that she did this, the woman sat at the table across from her, looking completely surprised and just kind of staring at her. And she really wasn't sure what she was thinking or what she was going to say. And the lady, the woman later says, you really knocked me off guard, because nobody has ever asked me that question before. She said, the mom, that reporters come in all of the time and they want to ask what's wrong with me or what went wrong in my life and how it is that I came to fall upon hard times. She's like, no one ever asked me what I do well. And after kind of getting over the surprise of this, the mom went on to speak for about an hour about her strengths and how she was able to cope day to day in poverty circumstances and being homeless. And Dr. Banyard in her dissertation goes on to talk about 65 other stories where she took this approach, stories of strength, endurance, and grit. And she points out that she would have never heard these types of stories if she didn't have a strength-based mindset or ask a strength-based question. So I love that. And the reason I love that so much, and I hope that resonates with you some, is because I have a similar story. And to just really make it short, a long story really short, is that going all the way back to the beginning of my career when I was working in an adolescent drug and alcohol treatment facility, very much like Dr. Banyard, I thought that I would go in there and offer the youth information, that I would give them everything that they would need, that I would be the person packing their suitcase, for example. My intentions were good. However, what I never dreamed of happening is that the youth in the program would change the course of my life and my career, instead of me so much potentially changing the course and the path of their lives, because I too came away infected by their abilities to learn, grow, their abilities to express joy and connection, even in the most toughest of circumstances. And I say this to you because what I didn't share is that I accepted that position initially on the contingency that I would only do it until I could find someone else. And that was 22 years ago. The young people in that program taught me something. And that something is that if I showed up and that I was intentional and that I showed interest in who they were, meeting them where they were, that the results would be completely different. And I've carried that with me throughout my entire career. Another more recent example is as recent as last week, I finished up a series of classes, another SAFE project program called the Connections Program. This program blends a strength-based approach to skill building while highlighting the value of interpersonal relationships. And so during this class, which took place this entire summer, or at least 6 weeks of the summer, I worked with young people in my community who have many adversities who are actually in a placement facility. And a section of the Connections course is building and completing a service learning project. Now, mind you, in this facility, we didn't have the liberty of going out into the community to do a service learning project. We really had to stay within the parameters of the campus. And so we're sitting there brainstorming about how the students might be able to complete a service project and what it is that they might want to do. And there were ideas all over the place. And one student spoke up and said, I want to do survival kits. I really think we should do a kit that we can give to the new incoming youth, because this particular student was saying, I know what it felt like when I came here firsthand, and that what comes in, how fearful I can feel, or how fearful I was. I didn't know anyone. I didn't really even want to be there. I didn't know what to expect. And they expressed that if somebody would have just came up to me and welcomed me in a different way, I would have felt more of a sense of connection. So nonetheless, I'm like, okay, let's do it. Let's make these survival kits. Keeping in mind that there's minimal resources. We don't have the ability to go out and buy all the great things to put into a kit. And so I said to the students, what skills do you have? What is it that you can put into this kit with the limited resources and access to things that we have? And it was absolutely beautiful when one student raised her hand and she's like, I can knit, and I can knit these little bumblebee stress balls, and I'll make 24 of them by next week. And I was like, okay. And then after she said that, another student said, I love to make bracelets. I'll make 24 friendship bracelets. And another student said, I know how to make roses out of paper. And another student said, I really love to journal. And the facility was able to get 24 blank journals. And this student wrote positive affirmations on the outside of every single journal, hand wrote them. And I can give you more examples, but you get the idea that these students, using their strengths and limited resources, then assembled 24 what they're calling survival kits. And the beauty of this then is that not only did they use their strengths and their passions, and they felt so good about doing this, is that they now look forward to making that interpersonal connection with the new students that come into the facility by approaching them and going up to them. And it was just a beautiful opportunity to see, again, the impact of being able to use the strengths that the students had and their ability to make a difference in their campus, and changing the culture and the feeling around, and just really being more inviting to young people. The faculty at this facility were overwhelmed by this idea. Many of them saying, why didn't we ever think of that? And so this is a great example of building a protective factor, and working to promote the strengths of the students themselves. All right. I'll come back to another example if I have time. What I really want to do now is I just really appreciate you listening to these stories, and allowing me the space to elevate the why. Why is this work so important? And how is it that the smallest step of asking, what are your strengths, or what are your gifts? What difference do you want to make, can make a difference? So now in the last portion of the presentation, I want to break this down for you, and provide steps. The steps are going to involve asking personal strengths, what are our strengths of the social network, and what are the strengths of the community. All right, perfect. Now you see what I'm looking at. So again, a reminder that a strength-based approach values the capacity, the skills, the knowledge, the connections of the students themselves. It's about elevating or amplifying the students' own autonomy, and empowering them to be the best version of themselves and what it is that they think is important. It's helping students build confidence and resilience. This is not about one talk. Many of you who are associated to the prevention field often have said that prevention is not just one and done, and it's not involve scare tactics. And that's not at all part of what this is. This is ongoing. And this is work that we can do in our everyday lives. I really want to bring light to the fact that I understand that the work that you're doing in the prevention field, whether you're doing this at home, in school, in community, is super important. And I'm hoping that this strength-based approach can be something that can be easily integrated into the amazing programs, amazing initiatives, and even in those one-on-one relationships that you have with students. It can also come into play with group interactions with students. So whether you're in a classroom, in the workplace, or working at some community facility. The steps are outlined on the screen. Again, we're talking about the strengths of the individual first and foremost. We then move into talking about the strengths of their networks and this could be the qualities and resources that come from their personal relationships, their connections with others. This can also include things like emotional support, access to information, access to opportunities, and feeling just an out and out sense of belonging. The third step then is, what are the strengths of the community? What's in place? What are the features and resources that are available in the local environment? What are the strengths and the resources that include safe neighborhoods, schools, accessibility to healthcare, parks, recreation, organizations, cultural activities? You get the idea there as well. What I want to do now, and I think it might be helpful, is if I walked you through an example. And so in this particular example, we want to build a protective factor around managing anxiety. This is hypothetical student, and working with the student, we would ask the student and help to identify the student's strengths. In this particular case, the student could enjoy listening to music and drawing. The student enjoys regular exercise and prides themselves on being punctual. The next part of the example then is that we then hone in on what are the strengths of the student's social network. So I just gave you some examples of that. Here they are outlined. So this is kind of like a stepping stone, right? We start with the individual, we work into the next domain of social networks. And so for this particular student, again, hypothetically, the student has access to information. This information can be in an array of places. So maybe this information is hanging outside the nurse's office on campus. Maybe this information is next to the admissions office, or maybe this information is at a bus station or in a healthcare facility. Many ways that information could be provided. The student also has a caring mentor, someone that checks in with them. This mentor could be a coach. This mentor could be someone from a youth group or some other youth serving organization or club. This mentor could also be a teacher, a faculty member, or a parent, a relative. And this student also has friends that show empathy and kindness. The last step then is identifying the characteristics of the student's community. So the next stepping stone is, what does the student have in place? And I have listed here that there's wellness and relaxation places on campus, there's access to counselors and therapists, and that there's meditation gardens and local parks. And so when we're thinking about managing anxiety for the student, if we looked at this whole picture, we might be able to provide protective supports by saying, okay, well, you enjoy exercise, you have a mentor that does regular check-ins with you, and you have meditation gardens in local parks. And so building together to support the anxiety by taking walks in parks with the mentor. So we're making that thread or knitting together all of these strengths to provide the opportunity to build a protective factor in an area where the student needed help. I really want to mention here in the last couple of minutes that I don't want this to feel like I believe that every community is perfect. I recognize that all individuals are different. I've said that multiple times throughout the presentation. Every student's different. Every student has unique qualities. The same is true for the communities. And the landscape of our communities is ever changing. I noticed that earlier somebody mentioned ICE as a risk factor. We realize that the work of prevention can be tough in this ever changing landscape and due to the climate that we are in. Going back to school this year is going to feel different in lots of states and lots of scenarios and lots of communities. That doesn't negate the need for us to do work. And in fact, it can hopefully empower us to want to be even stronger protective factors. but I really wanted to bring the light to the fact that I recognize that some communities have abundant privileges, and maybe just a few miles down the road or in a neighboring county, there's a completely different story, and that taking a strength-based approach recognizes these disparities. And in the examples given by Dr. Banyard and giving in the example of the students that I work with this summer, we can still do incredibly powerful work and be difference makers in the lives of students by looking at the step-by-step process of recognizing their strengths. This is a reminder of each of the steps: the personal strengths, the social network strengths, and the community strengths. Identifying these together. This isn't us telling or us identifying. This is work together with the students that we're working on. So in summary, I just really hope that the development of protective factors through strength-based approaches, that you realize that this builds connection, resilience, and healthy coping skills, and that it's a step that we can take together with students as leading protective factors to help create healthier students, create more and sustainable solutions for students, supporting students in their academic success as well as their personal development this school year and beyond. I hope you're feeling inspired and empowered as a leading protective factor, and that this approach is one that you can embrace and integrate into the engagements that you have with students in your lives. We have 3 minutes left. I think that I would like to come to this particular slide, giving you the opportunity to share your feedback with us. There is a QR code here listed on the screen. While you're taking that or accessing the QR code, I do want to remind you that a recording of this presentation will be shared with you, as well as supplemental resources. All the data resources that I indicated will also be shared with you, and as will our Safe Project's contact information. So on behalf of Safe Project, again, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your investment in young people. I wish you all a fantastic school year, and invite you to stay in touch with us here. Thank you.